we've been talking about the proliferation of low-wage jobs in our economy, but now I want to talk about the reality of living on the minimum wage. Our federal minimum wage leaves many families below the poverty line, even if the adults work full-time. 50 million Americans are at risk of going hungry. Almost a quarter of American children are in poverty. And yet, there is a myth that those without enough are not working, or worse, they are not even trying. Listen to what Congressman Paul Ryan said in an interview for the NBC News in Plain Sight Poverty Project.
I think what we're missing in this debate is when we're talking about reviving civil society, when we're talking about reviving community groups, when we're talking about reviving churches, what we mean when we say that is people themselves need to get involved in their communities to help people. That's what solidarity is. That means every individual takes responsibility for helping their brother, their sister, meaning their fellow citizen in their communities. And that act of involvement of human beings coming together to help one another, that's so much better than some cold government program.
Joining us now is Tiana Gaines-Turner of the Witness to Hunger Project, who along with her husband and 3 children is up for renewal of her federal health and food benefits next month. Tiana, thank you for joining us again.
Thank you for having me again.
What's your response to Congressman Ryan there?
I used to call him the RRs, the rhyming radicals.
Yeah.
That's what I used to call them, the rhyming radicals, because they have no clue. Like I said the last time I was here, everyone has something to say about someone who lives in hunger and poverty, but yet they've never sat down to the table. They're not involved at the table. They're making decisions in which infects our lives without even having conversations with us. They think they have the answers.
But Tiana, this is the moment when, for me, there is such a great privilege in having a television show, because you are one of the most exquisite speakers on this who I'm ever encountered. And Congresswoman Lee is one of the most important members of the Progressive Caucus in our U.S. House of Representatives. What would you like to say to the Congresswoman? You're all at the table together at this moment.
I would just like for us to say first, it's an honor to be sitting here, and thank you for having me. And, you know, have more people who are going through these programs at the table, at the conversations, not after the fact, not after both aisles have already voted, or if they, you know, sat in some type of back house and made these decisions and, oh, well, you know, something that they may have read in the paper. You know, invite us to the table. Have us sit there and you hear my story and you understand. Walk in my shoes. You know, that's what I tell everybody. It's easy for people to sit back and judge me without even asking me. And for those who are, you know, watching this show right now who live in hunger and poverty, stand up. Don't be silent. Don't be silent by the systems. Don't be silent by the caseworkers. Don't be silent. Stand up and be an advocate for yourself, for people to understand what you're going through.
Tiana, first of all, let me just say to you, you're very courageous and remarkable.
Thank you.
And I'm going to ask, I'm on Paul Ryan's committee, and they're having a hearing. We're having a hearing led by Paul Ryan on Wednesday to talk about poverty. I'm going to ask him if you can come to be a witness, first of all. Secondly, let me just say how proud I am of you for speaking out, because I was on public assistance. I was on food stamps.
Right.
You know, I had to struggle through in the early 70s raising my 2 kids, and it was really hard.
Right.
And so I just have to say to you, you are absolutely correct. We need more people who are struggling, who need a bridge over troubled waters,
right,
who don't need Section 8 cut, who don't need SNAP food stamps cut, who really need just that support from their government so that they can move forward and live the American dream, as you and your husband are really remarkable in showing that can be done.
Right.
So congratulations.
Thank you.
I hope I can see you on Wednesday, but I'm going to ask Congressman Ryan to invite you as a witness.
We're going to take a quick break and come right back, because I do want to talk to you a little bit about, you know, you and I are both moms, and we talked back in the spring about how do you feed the kids in the summer when school's out, when we come. Welcome back. I'm Melissa Harris Perry. 2 weeks ago, 6 Florida women acquitted George Zimmerman of both second-degree murder and manslaughter in the trial for the death of Trayvon Martin. In the immediate aftermath of the verdict, many asked, how could this happen? The first inkling of an answer to that question came when juror B37, speaking in shadow, revealed to CNN's Anderson Cooper that she saw the events of that tragic night in Florida from George Zimmerman's perspective.
I think he was frustrated. I think he was frustrated with the whole situation in the neighborhood, with the break-ins and the robberies, and they actually arrested somebody not that long ago.
Okay, but then this week we learned that not everyone in that jury room saw George Zimmerman as just a good guy who was frustrated and went a little too far. Revealing both her face and her first name, juror B29 said she believes George Zimmerman got away with murder, even though she stands by the verdict, saying it was a necessary decision under the law. As the details of the Zimmerman trial deliberations become clearer, I had to rewatch 12 Angry Men. You know it, the 1957 classic American film that casts Henry Fonda as the lone dissenter on an overheated jury prepared to convict a poor urban teenager of murder without even bothering to deliberate.
Then what do you want?
I just want to talk.
Well, what's there to talk about? 11 men in here think he's guilty. No one had to think about it twice except you.
I want to ask you something. Do you believe his story?
I don't know whether I believe it or not. Maybe I don't.
So how come you vote not guilty?
When there were 11 votes for guilty, it's not easy to raise my hand and send a boy off to die without talking about it first.
Over the next 90 minutes, juror number 8 there stands his ground in a room with 11 other men with deep-seated racial prejudice, men who are bored and uninterested, men who are tired of being sequestered and want to go home. Juror 8 makes them review the evidence, question their biases, and take seriously that they are the last opportunity for a young man to find justice. This is how we want to believe juries work, that as long as there is one Henry Fonda in the room, justice can be served. Which is why it became the standout moment from juror B29's interview with ABC's Robin Roberts when she said this.
As the law was read to me, if you have no proof that he killed them intentionally, you can't say he's guilty.
Did you want to step out at all? Did you want to
I was
quit?
The juror that was going to give him the hung jury.
What she said leaves me asking this. Was Maddie prepared to be a modern-day juror number 8, holding out against the group, working through the process, bringing her fellow jurors along one at a time? Or were the roles reversed? Maddie makes clear her initial emotion led her to believe George Zimmerman was guilty, but that through deliberative process found that Florida law gave her no choice but to acquit George Zimmerman. Joining me now is Jonathan Rosa, Assistant Professor of Anthropology at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, comedian and writer Elon James White, who is the creator of the web series This Week in Blackness, a satirical look at race, politics, and pop culture. Also with me, Michael Eric Dyson, Professor of Sociology at Georgetown University, and still with us, Congresswoman Barbara Lee of California. Jonathan, I want to start with you because B29 really, once again, sort of brought this conversation back. What do you make of her interview?
You know, it's really complicated because I think this case has really been, has involved discussions of racial ambiguity all along and questions about who George Zimmerman really is. Is he a white Hispanic? Is he Latino? What does this all mean? And so when I heard that this juror was potentially Latina and people couldn't make sense of her, I expected the potential for this sort of a situation to unfold. But we shouldn't be surprised on the one hand because, we have many psychological experiments that have shown us that in situations of extreme duress, people oftentimes make decisions that contradict their deeply held beliefs. But, I think that we could get caught up in the discussion of what her mindset is or what was happening in the jury room and forget actually the kind of, all of the range of policies that made this happen, right? So that we could get caught up on this individual case and forget that this is really about an assemblage of policies and structural issues that made Trayvon Martin disposable.
This is so important, Michael. It feels to me like the easiest thing to do would be to focus in on this woman and say, what's wrong with you? Why didn't you do more? Why didn't you, sort of gather more courage? Why didn't you push? But like the fact that she's in the room with only 5 other people instead of a full jury of 12, right? That there aren't 12 people, right? The very idea that this law exists that allows Mr. Zimmerman to carry the gun, the whole set of structures that were part of already taking Trayvon Martin away.
That's exactly right.
We're also part of her world.
That's exactly right. Look, you're blaming the person whose finger was too weak to stop the dam with the hole when you don't talk about everything else, the pressure, the structure of the building, the levees they were giving away, and the dam being, its infrastructure was weak to begin with. It's all a scapegoating of her, which would be to duplicate the very thing that happened to Trayvon Martin to begin with.
Yeah.
Why put the person of color on the firing line, so to speak, when the entire system itself has to be indicted for its inability to generate enough jurors to have conversation that would be complicated, a diverse jury pool that would at least represent an alternative perspective, and furthermore, the clarification of the rules. This woman is basically saying, you didn't do your job as a teacher. I don't go, you student, you're crazy. I got to say, yeah, Dyson, right. Explain it again, because you didn't reach this student. And though the prosecution did a horrible job of drawing the lines between the dots, and let's admit it, the defense had the wind behind its back, and it was able to make an argument and a narrative that was compelling even to a woman who emotionally felt that this was a wrong decision.
Yeah, and I felt, Congressman, I think that's part of what was so stunning about what she said is, actually, we've had the president say Trayvon Martin could have been my son, or if I'd had a son, he would look like Trayvon Martin. Well, I imagine her sons might also look like Trayvon Martin, might be subject to the same pressures, and yet she still felt that the law made it impossible for her to move on that instinct that she was having.
Sure, and this explains, I think, very clearly why we need to repeal, first of all, the Stand Your Ground laws. That's a must-do. Yep. Secondly, it also reveals the inequities in our criminal justice system that need to be looked at and closed. Thirdly, Melissa, I just have to say, and I agree with you, Michael, but, every now and then you have to take a stand. I would have hung that jury. Yeah. I would have hung that jury. So while we don't need to blame her for not hanging it, we have to at some point realize we do have some personal responsibility in trying to ensure that justice is done. And so we have to see this in context of the criminal justice system as being unjust and unfair and unequal.
But she seemed afraid to do that, don't you think, Congresswoman? The part of, I think, structural racism, too, is to really deprive you of a sense of the power you do actually possess. So she felt that it was almost illegitimate for her to exercise that power.
She almost felt that she could not hang the jury. And that's part of
that's a psychological
which is a psychological
But we also have to listen to what they were actually told. Jury B337 said flat out that she didn't understand the rules. Like she said, we were very confused about this, and so that's the person without any type of emotional connection to this thing. And so for the new juror B29, like I can easily see her being confused. Like she believed, like yes, I want this, but they're throwing 18 different rules at me. They threw Stand Your Ground. When they read the jury instructions, they were very long and very complicated. And so it's hard. I'm with Dr. Dyson here. I can't go at her like that, but I can go at the system like that, because the system obviously showed itself to be biased and failed.
But again, from a broader perspective, I think it's interesting the way that this case became a microcosm. It's not by chance that it's Florida, where there are all these anxieties about what the Latino population means. It's a swing state, right? And so in which way, the only questions we have to ask based on our ideas about a racial binary is which way will Latinos go? Will they be white or black? We can't imagine Latinos in their own specificity. So we end up asking, what is George Zimmerman? What is this juror? And which way, who do they team with? And it leads us to play up the black-Latino tensions. It leads us to all of these kinds of questionable conclusions.
Yeah, Jonathan, to the extent that we're talking about, on the one hand, there's this verdict and this thing that happened. But almost more important, more interesting is what this thing, how in our perception of it, it ends up having all of these other meanings. And so it was part of why I wanted you at the table is so that we could talk about the ways in which the very particular position of her as a Puerto Rican woman becomes part of what is read onto this narrative. So we'll take a quick break because they're screaming at me, and then we'll come back because I do want to think about like how that race story about black, brown, and white is playing out in some ways that we need to pause, breathe, and know something about before we move forward.